hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with The Guardian's Whitehall editor, Rowena Mason, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Lovely to see both of you. With us from now until just before midnight, but right now, front pages. Let's start with the Metro. It sums up the Home Secretary's migration speech in Washington with the headline, Suella, it's too easy to be a refugee. The Times picks up on her remarks that immigration is a threat to the West. The Mirror sums up her speech in one word, poisonous. The Eye reports that private schools are gearing up to fight plans by Labour, if it gets into power, to end their exemption from charging VAT on their fees. Same story for the Daily Mail, which says that what it calls Labour's class war would begin on day one of taking power. The Guardian says that health experts are calling for a more feminist approach to cancer to eliminate inequality after figures show that 800,000 women worldwide are dying needlessly from the condition every year. The Telegraph leads with a report on the effects of COVID lockdown, which has concluded that the harm that some children suffered was preventable if ministers had thought more at the time about children's rights. The Financial Times hears that the US Federal Trade Commission and 17 state governments are accusing Amazon of effectively creating a monopoly by taking nearly 50% of the proceeds made by its third-party sellers. And finally, the Daily Star claims to have saved the world by buying a plot of ground on the moon to keep the US and China apart and prevent them from starting World War III. Well, reminder by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen. During the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch us. So let's head to Rowena and Ali. Welcome to both of you. Braverman for a number of newspapers. Day two for some of them, to be fair. Ali, why don't you kick off? What did you make of what she had to say and the critique that many have given the speech?
Well, it was a very punchy speech. It was quite a long speech as well, about 4,500 words, so it's quite, detailed. It was very interesting because she's obviously clearly taking a real, focusing on this whole illegal migration issue, which has been dogging her own position for so long on this. We have 170,000 backlog that she's dealing with at the moment. And some would argue, actually, that she should be focusing on trying to reduce that backlog rather than taking cheap shots. But she also said very, very clearly that uncontrolled immigration is an existential threat and challenge to the political and cultural institutions of the West. I mean, this is very, very punchy stuff. Now, if she's going to make arguments like that, she needs to back it up. I mean, the reality is we do have an illegal migration problem in this country. I agree with her on that point. But you need to be very, very careful as a Home Secretary with the language that you use. I mean, she's talking about the fact that LGBT people or people who feel that they're being discriminated against, that should not be enough of a threshold to come here and seek asylum. 2%, less than 2% of people are citing that as a reason. So I understand that we need to break the people smuggling gangs business model. I get that. I support her on that. But I think some of this language is incendiary. And if she wants to talk about multiculturalism, and I have some issues with multiculturalism as well, but it needs to be handled and explained very clearly what she means. Otherwise, this is incendiary.
Well, what she's talking about is in 1951, it meant persecution. Now it means discrimination, and that's not on. And if you include discrimination, effectively, quoting Nick Timothy and a colleague, 780 million people worldwide would fall under the UN Convention, which would be an existential threat to Western society. And the nation state, which she says is so important as binding, our society and our rules. So, is she right about that? This idea that discrimination is morphed into discrimination when it really means a threat to life. Do you think that is happening?
I think what she's talking about being a threat to Western civilization, I mean, that's very, very many steps into the future that nobody could possibly say that that's happening now. And it's dangerous, her critics say, to be trying to draw this distinction between persecution and discrimination. There are lots of people all over the world, LGBT people, women who are suffering really severe worries about discrimination and horrible practices.
In Afghanistan, for example.
In Afghanistan, for example.
Yes, safe route, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the problems with the argument that she's putting forward, that we shouldn't be taking anybody from France because they're not a refugee, because they are in what she'd call a safe third country. I mean, that's completely nonsensical when we don't have safe routes for people who are suffering persecution.
The point she's saying there, though, is that when you leave a war zone, for example, when you migrate from that to a safe country, you are an asylum seeker. Beyond that, you're shopping around.
Well, I agree with her on that. I think she's got a valid point on that. And the thing that, Rowena, people never, ever are honest about when they talk about this is there going to be a cap on refugees coming to this country? I mean, even the Labour Party, last time I heard Stephen Kinnock, even he was being open about the possibility, if Labour come in, of there being a cap, because you have to cap the numbers. So if we want to talk about safe and legal routes, I get that.
Cap the numbers if you can't control them, and they can't control them.
You at least should, in principle. The argument people give, Anna, is that the reason why people are coming across in boats and paying unscrupulous people smugglers 15 grand a pop to put their lives at risk in the Channel is because there are no safe and legal routes. My argument is, if you want safe and legal routes, have them, but they have to then be capped.
Yeah. What she wants to do, though, is sort of ripping up this decades-old convention, potentially withdraw from the ECHR as well, the European Convention on Human Rights. I mean, that is not something that Rishi Sunak and his government have said that they would want to do. I mean, they've said that they'd keep options on the table if they can't implement their Rwanda policy, but they have not gone that far. It's a very, very extreme
So is she being a loose cannon? I mean, is this a leadership pitch?
Yes. I mean, it is a it's a very thinly veiled leadership pitch. I think we can all agree on that, really. And, you know, it's coming the week before Conservative Party conference. It's not clear quite how sanctioned this is as an intervention. It certainly goes further than the government.
Well, it's taken HS2 off the front pages.
Has done.
Indeed so. And in fact, I heard there was debate about whether to release the speech, embargoed till 10:30 last night, and the decision was to release it. Wonder why. Anyway, but there we are. There's the Guardian, the UN rebuking Braverman over human rights claims. Great long statement from them. They said the Refugee Convention is the cornerstone of the international refugee protection regime and remains a life-saving instrument that ensures millions of people fleeing conflict and persecution each year can access safety and protection across borders. Talks about the numbers, 780 million. They say actually there's 35 million refugees worldwide, 70% remaining in countries neighbouring their own, like, for example, Ethiopia, for Sudan, Jordan, Turkey. And then specifically on the UK, in this great long statement, an appropriate response to the increase in arrivals and to the UK's current asylum backlog would include strengthening and expediting decision-making procedures. So why don't we expedite decision-making procedures?
I mean, she's talking about sort of ripping up the whole system when there are potentially ways that the small boats problem could be addressed much closer to home. What Labour's talking about is trying to do more deals with France to stop this happening in the first place, having a closer relationship with the EU to try and stop the problem at source. The other thing that the opposition parties are pointing out is that the current system is in chaos because of Conservative inaction on the backlog of processing asylum applications. So, you know, there are so many things that could be done before we get to this point of kind of making great big international statements about ripping up the whole system that governs the world.
Ron, I think Starmer's trying to be pragmatic by going and trying to say to Macron, look, we're out of the Dublin Convention because we left the EU, let's form another deal. The reality is I don't think that's going to really move the dial. I do think that they should be processing the backlog faster, but the problem here is the productivity is really low. They're processing about one application a week. Some of these people
are they held up in appeals? That's my...
There are appeals, but also you've got very inexperienced staff, and they're quite difficult to recruit people to actually process this. And the numbers are huge numbers coming across. And the other thing where I do have some sympathy with Braverman and the government is that some people are abusing the asylum system to come here. There were 12,000 Albanians last year who were economic migrants. They were not asylum seekers. There are many genuine asylum seekers, but they weren't them. And that actually abuses the whole system for other genuine people who are fleeing persecution.
The Mirror's picked up on this as well. I'm just going to read out the head of Amnesty International's response. The Refugee Convention is a cornerstone of the international legal system. We need to call out this assault on the Convention for what it is, a display of cynicism and xenophobia. My point is this an election winner? Do people want to see the end of the boat crossings and other forms of migration?
Well, I think Suella Braverman probably does really genuinely believe this is her, you know, she's long been a hardliner on immigration. I don't think anyone can doubt that. But I think part of her calculation is not necessarily even whether this is an election winner for her and her party. It's what happens after the election. It's what happens if the Conservatives lose the election and Rishi Sunak steps down. This is a very strong pitch.
Well, she's middle ranking.
Right of her party,
Well,
and I imagine it will be very popular with Conservative members.
I don't think Rowena's wrong. I think she's middle ranking in the Conhome table, the league table of ministers, and Kemi's way out in front at the moment. So they're all positioning and jockeying ahead of what is going to look increasingly looking like a defeat for the Tories next time.
I had a sudden flash that Liz Truss could stand again anyway.
Never know.
We all... No. Anyway, so talking about election, let's go to the Daily Mail and indeed the Eye, which ran this last night. It's about whether or not you add VAT to private school fees. Clearly a divisive issue. The Daily Mail saying it's a class war. Ali.
It is a class war, and it's an utter disgrace, quite frankly. There are lots of people up and down this country that can ill afford to send their kids to private schools, including my sister, who sends 4 of her kids there, works day and night to do it. I also went to a private school. My parents also worked very, very hard to do that too. The reality is that there are some private schools that this will not affect at all because they're going to be the preserve of increasingly richer and richer people. You also see
often from abroad.
Often from abroad, but this will actually squeeze hard-working people who actually feel that the state school provision in their areas is woefully inadequate. So I think this is the politics of envy. And I also think that the Labour Party has to come clean about the fact that 20% of parents who are sending their kids to independent schools at the moment say they will have to pull them out if this VAT exemption gets slashed. That is going to come in. And they're going to have to spend another 100 to 300 million on kids who are going to go back into the state sector. Well, and what's going to happen, Anna? What's going to happen? People are going to move to houses. You're going to have an increase in house prices with parents who can afford to buy expensive houses close to the best schools.
Well,
that's what's going to happen.
You know that happens already, don't you? Anyway,
of course it does.
Estimated 1.7 billion a year could be raised, so your 300 million extra cost may be still you get a profit out of it. The Eye says the head teacher of Starmer's old school urges him to reconsider the plan. Now, why is this popular amongst Labour voters? And the presumption that suggestion was it was 1 million parents, I think, might be affected by this, that those people would not vote Labour.
I think that Labour will not be too worried about these headlines about a sort of backlash from private schools because they think it is popular and they will just be happy that this policy is being talked about. It's one of the few sort of real dividing line policies between the Tories and Labour. They think that people like it. Most people don't send their children to private schools, and as you say, the people who do send their children to private schools are more likely, not all of them, but more likely to vote for the Tories.
Yes, 93%, isn't it? Is it 7% go to 6 or 7% go to private schools? Water companies, let's take a look at the Metro, shall we? Water companies have been ordered to give back 114 million to customers after failing to meet key targets. Here's the list: to reduce pollution, leaks and supply interruptions. To be fair, the weather's a bit interesting at times, isn't it?
Well, as someone who's had their basement flooded with sewage in London, I mean, I know a little bit too much about this issue, more than I would like to know. And I've actually been dealing with my insurance company that's finally signed off, which is great. So I should be getting that repaired. But at great personal hardship, quite frankly. This is not a great advertisement. We do need to upgrade our Victorian infrastructure. We need to ultimately spend more money on that. And that means the bill payer is going to have to pay. Someone has to pay. Off what the regulator is actually saying, look, you've got to give back this 140 million pounds to your customers because your leaks have been so bad, your record on sewage has been so poor. So obviously water companies need to deal with that, but fundamentally someone's going to have to pay, and it's going to be the bill payers ultimately. That's what's going to happen.
And fundamentally they need more water storage so we don't put sewage into the sea, and that probably will be an election issue, Rowena.
I mean, it really will be. It's something that gets the voters going so much, this persistent, flagrant abuse of the rules by some of the water companies, releasing sewage into Britain's waterways. And to be honest, 140 million doesn't seem like enough to stop them doing it. You know, this has been going on for so long. It's not stopping. The penalties just seem to be a slap on the wrist compared with...
Yeah. But they're getting fines on top, I suppose.
But we've got Victorian infrastructure. That's the point, particularly in large cities like London. This is why, for example, the Thames Tideway tunnel that's being built under the Thames is going to actually have a material effect, because when you have heavy rainfall like we've been having in the last few days, a lot of this becomes raw sewage going into the... And you have to be, brave to go and swim in that, in the Thames, quite frankly. But that's what happens. So we have to upgrade the fundamental infrastructure, which is very hard and expensive to do.
Yep, thought you were going to talk about railways there for a bit. We've done that this week. Anyway, lots more still to come, including could a so-called feminist approach to cancer care save lives? Back with that and more in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, Ali Miraj and Rowena Mason. So let's go to The Guardian, shall we? And this story that a feminist approach to cancer could save 800,000 women's lives a year. So what is the principle behind it? Is that testing's not done on women and that symptoms are not assessed as if it was for a woman?
That's right. There's this huge study that's been done, the largest report of its kind, looking at women and cancer in 185 countries. And they found really unequal results for women and that cancers weren't being picked up in the same way. I think that there was a particular focus on women's cancers like breast cancer and cervical cancer, despite lung and colorectal cancer being huge killers among women as well. So it's about symptoms not being recognised, about treatments being tailored more towards men, and that 800,000 women potentially worldwide have died needlessly as a result.
I mean, a lot of the difficulty, I understand, is that testing can't so easily be done on women because they might be pregnant and you don't know what a baby could suffer effectively or endure. So that has, led to potentially things like heart disease, heart attacks, the symptoms being listed as if they were for a male.
Well, indeed. Look, I think a lot of the system historically has been built around men, and I think that's part of the problem here. So if this report is indeed showing this, and also this is only one element of it, because I've spoken to a lot of women from ethnic minorities about the same type of topic, and they feel, for example, black women in some cases feel that their pain relief that they're given in childbirth is a lot less than their white counterparts because of perceptions amongst doctors and nurses. Now, that is also, there is evidence to cite that too. So I think there are various issues to be looked at here. Clearly, this is a very serious report. It needs to be addressed properly. And if there is an focus on certain cancers to the expense of others, just because they're deemed female cancers, that's a problem. I mean, we need to be looking at cancer in the round, all cancers, to make sure that they're picked up early and dealt with accordingly.
The size of tech companies, if that's how you describe Amazon, under the spotlight in the Financial Times, which effectively said it's a monopoly, therefore it can overcharge third-party sellers.
It's very interesting. US regulators always seem to be quite a bit more punchy than our own. And this is the US Federal Trade Commission and 17 American states suing Amazon, alleging that it's overcharging customers. And I guess the question is, would a similar thing happen over here? Would our regulators, would our government be willing to take on Amazon in quite the same way? I mean, some Labour has said that it'll look at the taxation around online giants, but this sort of competition investigation into big online giants is not really as big a thing in the UK.
There has been a little bit of work around the CMA signing off certain things. I think it was another big deal that was being done a little while ago where they did actually flex their muscles, and the European regulators are a lot more amenable to it. Now, on this particular one, Rowena's right here. This is the FTC flexing its muscles, particularly the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Lina Khan, who is a well-known skeptic of Amazon. She's not basically a fan. In 2017, she wrote an academic paper saying that it should be broken up. And so Amazon's retorting, saying, well, actually, you should recuse yourself from anything to do with the governance of us at all, because you've got a dog in the fight, basically.
But the figures are utterly extraordinary. One, they accused the 1.3 trillion e-commerce giant of boosting fees to sellers on its marketplace so that it extracts almost $1 in every $2 they make. I mean, that's a big profit margin.
Well, I mean, it's huge. I mean, it's acting like a quasi-monopoly now, and that is where regulators have to step in to try and see what they can do to protect consumers.
Yeah. Daily Star, 78 quid. They've bought a bit of the moon to act as a buffer, they say, between China and the US, because that is the future of mining, apparently.
I mean, it seems rather cheap, doesn't it, for a patch of land on the moon? I'm not really sure how much use it would be, though. So maybe it's expensive. Maybe it's totally worthless.
Well, we're all going to be believing in interplanetary living, according to Elon Musk, right? So this is it seems quite a sensible approach. I mean, in the week when NASA brought back that asteroid to Earth, I think all things space are on top of the agenda. But the reality is we are facing geopolitical tensions out there. Yeah. So if you want to go to another planet for safety, it probably is quite a sensible approach.
Ali, Rowena, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. See you in the 11. Right now, we've got Storm Magnus to talk about.